You're listening to the Weekend Sport Podcast with Jason Pine from News Talk ZB.
The 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup has been terrific. 63 games down, 1 to go. The Women's World Cup final at Stadium Australia in Sydney tonight from 10 o'clock New Zealand time. England.
The referee puts the whistle to our mouth, and England, for the first time in their history, are Women's World Cup finalists.
Up against Spain.
Yes, Spain are into their first ever Women's World Cup final. A remarkable tale of triumph against the odds, against a backdrop of unrest, a team full of talent and now full of joy.
So we're going to have a new name etched on that trophy tonight. Neither England or Spain have ever been in a World Cup final, let alone winning one. Let's bring in women's football writer at The Athletic and commentator for BBC 5 Live, Charlotte Harpur. Charlotte, thanks for your time. Let's talk about England. How have you assessed the progression of England through this tournament?
It was definitely a steady start. If you wind back to the European Championships last year, England won 1-0 against Austria, but then blew Norway away 8-0, and the goals were flying in. This hasn't been the same performance, and there were doubts over how far England would get because of those slightly cagey. Things just weren't clicking for England in the group stages.
But they have started to click, certainly in the knockout rounds and especially in the semi-final against Australia. Where and why do you think it's clicked?
I think firstly, Millie Bright coming in as captain. She hadn't played a competitive game since March, and there was some definite rustiness in the opening games. She's really hit her stride, and a key tactical change when England went from a 4-3-3 to a 3-5-2 in the China game, their third group stage game. And that has really allowed England to unlock those channels. But England have just seemed to find a way. They have this unwavering belief. It's not arrogance. It's just that aura of confidence. They've been in these situations before, and they've ground out the results when it matters.
The semi-final win over Australia at a packed house in Sydney, 75,000 in there, the emotion, the hype around Australia. England got the job done, and emphatically so at the end of the night. How does that semi-final performance compare to recent games you've watched this England side play?
That was their best performance of the World Cup so far. We saw England in control. They moved the ball really well. Their tempo was good. They made the right decisions, and they were just perfection and professionalism. No player had a poor game. They did the basics really well. They managed it. Even when Sam Kerr hit that absolute worldie, and you thought, wow, Australia are back in this. They've got the crowd behind them. England stayed calm. And in previous years, they would have crumbled, but they didn't. And that front two of Alessia Russo and Lauren Hemp has been really key in finding the goals. But the back three of England have been resolute. They've conceded very few goals, one a controversial penalty, and then two long-range efforts. So Sarina Wiegman hates talking about individuals, and that really was a team performance.
All right, well, I'm going to ask you about a couple of individuals, if that's okay. And the first is Lauren James. She hasn't played the last two games through suspension. She is available for the final tonight. How do you think Sarina Wiegman will use Lauren James? Will she start her? And how would you do it if you were in charge?
It's really interesting. I spoke to the Leicester City manager, Willie Kirk. I've seen Casey Stoney, who manages out in the NWSL, former Manchester United manager, and they're saying start James. And of the managers I've spoken to, they just say she's such a unknown quantity. That moment of magic, James will deliver. But I think Sarina Wiegman will stick with her starting 11, and I think she will play Ella Toone. She was asked why she kept the same starting 11 for the semi-final as the quarter-final. Ella Toone featured in both, and she said, I was happy with the performance. There was no need to change. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But Wiegman likes consistency. My worry is it will be a real midfield battle against Spain. And Ella Toone is more suited to that role than Lauren James. The grafters, England won't have a lot of the ball, and England will need to stay patient tonight and not get frustrated. So I would stick with Toone, but it really is a 50-50. It'll be very, very intriguing to see how Wiegman manages this one.
Given the fact that, as you mentioned, Charlotte, this is likely to be a game that has, a pretty key battle in midfield, how crucial, therefore, will Keira Walsh and Georgia Stanway be for the Lionesses?
Crucial. Georgia Stanway is a workhorse. She will be the one putting in tackles, box to box, running her socks off. Keira Walsh plays that more, the deeper role, and will be controlling that. Of course, she knows a lot of those Barcelona players, having spent her first season with Barcelona last year. It's interesting, though, because Walsh hasn't had the same impact this year as she did in the Euros. And that's mainly because teams have worked out that if they stifle Keira Walsh, they stifle England's progressive play. So it will be a numbers game in midfield. Spain have Aitana Bonmatí, Alexia Putellas and Aballera. And that's where things tick for Spain. And because they love to have the ball, England will just have to stay patient.
Well, I want to talk about those Spanish threats in a moment, but can we just pivot to Sarina Wiegman, the manager of England? I mean, her success in the women's game in recent times has been well documented. First manager, for instance, to take two separate nations to a World Cup final, the Netherlands last time and England this time. What makes Sarina Wiegman so effective as a football manager?
Great question. Let's start with the football. She has a plan. She thinks about every scenario, and they, not necessarily with the players, but she will discuss with her technical team, well, what happens if we get a red card in the first 10 minutes? What happens if the opposition get a red card in the first 10 minutes? What happens if they bring this player on? And her communication with the team is very simple. She doesn't overload them too much, but they feel prepared. So she leaves no stone unturned. Second is communication. Every player in that England squad knows their role. They know whether they're starting, they know whether they're finishing, and they know if they're not going to get any minutes. And that's probably at the start of the tournament. So the players aren't led on to believe that, I'm going to start for 90 minutes and then get dropped. It's not this level of consistency. She's very transparent for them. And having spoken to the England players, they really appreciate that honesty. Then there's this belief and confidence that she injects into the players' veins. And when you see a player full of confidence, that really lifts them to another level. And through her wise words and experience, she's been there before, she transmits that to them, as well as a sense of calmness. It can get pretty intense in those team talks when you're in a World Cup final. But she exudes that calmness with the team. And finally, a sense of joy and freedom. She'll always say to the substitutes, enjoy, have fun, play like you were as a young girl. So there are game plans, there are patterns of play, but she gives the players license to express themselves. And you can read more on The Athletic about how Sarina Wiegman manages. I went over to Rotterdam, where she's from, and spoke to her colleagues when she was a PE teacher, or when she was a player. And it really is that there's that competitor, that steeliness about her. There's the fire in the eyes, but on the outside, she keeps it very cool and collected. I have to add that her right-hand man is Ian Verink. He's been described as a tactical genius, the mastermind behind England's success. So you've got the player management of Sarina Wiegman, plus the tactical aspects, and he really has an eye for detail. And as a duo, they're pretty formidable.
Well, that is amazing analysis and insight, Charlotte. You've really given us a great idea of Sarina Wiegman's management style there. So let's get onto the pitch again. You mentioned a couple of the Spanish players, Aitana Bonmati, Alexia Putellas. Let's not forget Selma Parahuelo, who's come off the bench in the last 2 games and scored in both of them to help Spain through to the final. Will this be England's biggest defensive test of this World Cup?
Yes, 100%. It's exhausting playing Spain. I spoke to the England goalkeeper, Mary Earps, and analysed her saves. And we went through the Spain match last year, and she just said it was so tiring, just making sure that your defence is organised and transitioning across when you don't have the ball. It's also frustrating. Footballers, sound simple, like to be on the ball. And so when Spain dominate that position and you're having to shuffle across, it is really testing, not only physically, but mentally. We spoke about that midfield. The one thing that Spain have is a weak defence. Their defence is quite flat. So England will be looking to get in behind that defensive line and making runs in behind. And that's where I think England's defence will stand resolute. Parahuelo, as you mentioned, she's a wild card. We've seen how she can change the game as an impact substitute. Her pace is ridiculous. She used to be a sprinter and could have made the Olympics with that, her former coach told The Athletics. So she's definitely one to watch. But I think pros for England are their collectiveness. Last year, 15 players signed that letter to the federation saying that they didn't want to play under Jorge Vilda. And there's still a split in the Spain squad. So it's unbelievable how those players have reached that level, even with disagreement behind the scenes with the coach. And you can see the little things of the players not necessarily going to congratulate him, or so there's definitely some underlying issues still there. But don't write off Spain. I think it will be a really tough test. And the quality of the Spanish players is probably the best that we've seen this tournament. The one thing is that there is a blueprint to beat Spain. They were really poor against Japan, losing 4-0 and completely collapsed. But they bounced back from that. I don't think England or anybody else really has a blueprint to beat England, because they're really tough to defeat.
If they were to win tonight, if England were to win and to add a World Cup to the European title they won a year ago, what would that mean to women's football in England?
As you said, it's an addition, but it's like a double whammy. So we've seen the effect of the Euros and the participation levels and the perception of society. And now they're just reinforcing that and really laying those foundations. So adding a World Cup, I think people have just seen women's football in a completely different way. Even seeing it in Australia, how the nation got behind them. It was the 11.5 million tuning in to that semi-final, the highest viewership of any TV show. So for England, I think it will also accelerate the much needed changes. So there will be a bigger disparity between a World Cup final and then the domestic league. And the WSL is one of the most competitive in the world, but there are still teething issues regarding, we had a frozen pitch between Chelsea and Liverpool when the game was abandoned in January. So you can imagine Sam Kerr and Millie Bright, one of the stars of this tournament, then going to have to play a pitch which is full of ice and snow. So there's still discrepancies regarding infrastructure and facilities. And I think a win, even without the win, to be honest, the fact that they've reached another final, but a win would accelerate that change, accelerate the investment and the need to actually, we really need to create those foundations and make sure they're solid, not only for this year and next year, but all these girls who are wanting to play football, make sure that they come into a professional league and they are treated like athletes of the highest caliber.
All right, Charlotte, well, you've given us incredible insight, cool-headed analysis, but What about the England fan in you? How was the fan in you feeling ahead of the World Cup final?
Oh, the fan is discombobulated. I actually had a bike incident in June and got concussion, so I couldn't fly out to Australia. So it's massive FOMO of not being out there, but I'll be nervous. I have that kind of last year at the Euros and the England versus Germany. I had that pit of nerves in my stomach, but just having interviewed the players in the past, they're great people, very grounded, very giving with their time. Some legends like Lucy Bronze, who have been at the 2015 World Cup, 2019 World Cup, never made a World Cup final, knows what her voice can do for that platform. So the fan is, obviously I'm trying to be an objective journalist, but the fan is wanting England to win, but just proud of what women's football has done in Australia and spread its joy to so many people. And it'll be really fun to watch.
Fun and no doubt a bit nerve-wracking as well. Charlotte, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. You've given us great insight into tonight's final between England and Spain. Enjoy the game and thanks for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Charlotte. Charlotte Harpur there. Read her at theathletic.com. She's also a commentator with BBC 5 Live, and as you can hear there, a pretty astute analyst of the game.
For more from Weekend Sport with Jason Pine, listen live to News Talk ZB weekends from midday or follow the podcast on iHeartRadio.